Harold and Connie Rosen, or my mum and dad. When I was a kid, I didn't always notice, but my parents were a bit different. And one day in October 1972, my dad was reading the newspaper. It said something about an event at WORLD Guardian Cafe. Loads of people were going, and my dad loves a good cozy time around people with a nice drink and food, just like my mum. So Dad said, "Why don't we go there?" And Mum said yes, so they got the food and res ready. They were really looking forward to it. So not long after, a few days later, the day had arrived. That evening, my mum and dad took the car, and when they got there, they noticed the people, hundreds of them. Dad said, "Look at that." "Okay then, let's go to the entrance." And there it was, WORLD Guardian Cafe. It was huge. Mum said, "Hey Harold, this is a long line." It was then my dad noticed the people in front of them. Dad said, "God, when I get inside, getting a bit cross." Oh no, the moment my mum dreads, because he always hauls her into it as well. And Mum tries to be distracting. "Look out the window. There's a hot rod." "Oh yeah, that's rather nice one." And everything was okay again for a while. It was then they got closer and closer. So my mum said, "What do you want then?" Dad said, "A drink." Mum said, "What kind?" And he said, "I'll have a whiskey." "Oh yeah, Jack Daniels, all right." But Mum said, "And how about lemonade?" "That's nice too." Dad said, "Waste of money. I want good stuff." Mum said, "Lemonade costs way less, and I'm not having you sitting there getting drunk." Dad said, "For fuck's sake, okay, I'll have orange juice with some meat then." And Mum said, "Fair enough, love." It was then they were next in line, so not long after, they sat down and waited by the window after ordering food and drinks. Dad said, "Look over there. Him, you see that bloke? He's brilliant at the guitar." There was a man called Tom Davis who turned up to play music with a woman called May Alexander. Her husband Jack was there too, playing drums, and the music began. Dad said, "I like it." Then food and drinks came in, and the woman put it down in front of Mum and Dad. Dad looked to see what there was, and suddenly he said, "I didn't order lemonade, I ordered orange juice." And the waiter said, "Sorry, then where is I get another one?" And off she went to get it. So they sat dead quiet, watching, listening to the music. After a while, my mum and Dad started looking all around the cafe. Mum said, "What's that?" Dad said, "I don't know." At the table next to them, a group of people in interesting dark clothes turned up and sat down. The waiter came running. It was then he knocked over Dad's orange juice. "Oh, sorry, and there's my dad and he's roaring. I don't believe it, I really don't. Do you people have no eyes?" And there's my mum, all shaky and shuddery. The waiter said, "Don't be so rude." Dad said, "Well, don't be so stupid." Then it was then there was a man who got up and he said, "That's enough." Dad said, "What's it got to do with you?" The man shouted out, "Don't you dare throw a tantrum here. This is a fun event." Dad said, "Then don't stick your nose into my business." Any other day, he would have said, "Just go away." But that day, something more was up. Mum said to the man, "Leave him alone." People were looking, and that includes the before-looking people. The man starts to laugh. "All right," he says, "look, right, that's it. If you two don't stop it, I'm going to get you out this cafe." Dad shouted out, "Face off!" Everyone in the cafe looked round. The man began to walk towards my mum and dad, and then that really does it. Suddenly, my dad's eyes turned red. Then he got up. He said in his spooky voice, "I'll finish you. Do you want to die? Let me do it." Dad's hand darted across the table to pick up the knife, and he ran. Suddenly, the man jumped up and ran away as fast as he could. It's no good. My dad jumped on him and began to cut into the head. Straight away, the music stopped. There was an awful yelling and crying. There was the noise of people running. The man screamed, "Quick, get out, get out!" Blood poured out of his mouth. Blimey. Suddenly, there was a man who turned up with a shotgun. "Stop right there," he said. Then, suddenly, my dad threw the knife into the air. Straight away, the man fell over and died with a knife in his skull. Dad said, another spoonful, anyone?" It was then he noticed the before-looking people. There was a fat woman with them there. She was watching my dad. Suddenly the before-looking people went off behind the curtains on the stage. So my dad looked at my mum. She was shaking and crying, but her eyes were red as well. Dad said, "Come on, come in." She said, "Okay, yeah, okay." Dad rushed to pick up the shotgun and my mum and Dad began to walk towards the stage. Meanwhile, people were still running. Dad said, I've got to do it. I've got to do it. Suddenly he began to aim. He couldn't help himself. There's my mum, she's doing the same with a knife. And there's my dad, and he's going. It was then they noticed there was a man standing on the balcony above them. His black grey and dark clothes were like armor. He was watching. Dad rushed, but by the time he began to aim, the man had gone. So then, my mum and Dad ran and jumped on the stage and went behind the curtains. The forward-looking people weren't there anymore either. Suddenly there was the noise of someone shouting. So my mum and Dad noticed the woman and the man hiding in the corner of the room. They were May Alexander and her husband Jack Alexander sitting there, all shaky and shuddery. Jack screamed, "Oh no, this is horrible! Please leave us alone. I will do anything. Just stop, please." Dad said, "I've got to do it. I've got to do it." May screamed, "No!" Dad's finger darted to the trigger. And he said, "Sorry, nothing at all." The cafe shooting was horrible. There was yelling, crying and shouting, and so it went on. Yeah, do you know, at the end of the shooting, there were bodies and blood all over Dolce's Grand Cafe. My mum and Dad were just about to leave then. Suddenly, they heard the police sirens. Police officer Georgie was standing outside with a megaphone. "This is the police. We've had surrounded the cafe. Drop the guns and come outside and put your hands out into the air where I can see you murderers. Rats!" That really winds them down. There's my mum. She said, "What the fuck have we done, Harold? We've got big bother." Suddenly, Dad looks confused, and he settles down with his shotgun and then started looking all around the cafe with his eyes looking more again and said, "Dead people. Come in. Why aren't they dead?" What happened? Suddenly, my mum fainted and fell on the floor. "For the last time, drop the guns and come outside and put your hands out into the air where I can see them now." My dad rushed to pick up my mum and he very carefully began stepping towards the door, walking between the bodies and the arcs of blood. Then he got to the cafe front door, all shaky, and began stepping outside, and there they were. Loads of police cars and officers. Dad kept thinking about the shotgun that was now on the floor behind him, and he asked himself, "Did we do this?" There was blood on his clothes and his face. Georgie shouted out, "What have we just asked you to do? Hands up!" And there's my dad. And my mum and Dad went to prison. And there they were, behind bars. It was horrible. All they got to eat was bread, and not very nice bread either. And they still didn't understand what happened. But not long after, a few days later, 3 people turned up in front of my mum and Dad's prison chamber. They were interesting-looking soldiers. One was in front, and the soldiers called him Commander Tonar. And he said, "Right, you two, you're gonna come with us." And off they go. They took my mum and Dad to a secret place. So first of all, they were blindfolded. They were taken in for questioning. Then, not long after, "So you're saying none of you remembers what happened?" Dad said, "That's right." "Okay then, one moment." It was then the soldier left the room. Mum said, "I hate all this crap. I want to go home." "Yeah, me too," said my dad. They're looking at each other. "I've got to have some help. Go get Mark for me." "Yes, Commander." Meanwhile, Mum and Dad took the chance, climbed up into the ventilation shaft, and there they were, breathing very, very quietly. Dad said, "This way. Come in." "Shh. I was only saying." Fuck. not long after, Mum and Dad were running to this parking lot, and there were two cars. One was a Chevrolet Camaro, the other car was this hot rod. Dad said, "Why don't we take that hot rod?" Mum said, "I don't care, just go quick." Dad said, "If you want fast, then the hot rod it is." And they each took a brick to smash in the windows. Slap! Straight away, they climbed in and then started the engine. Then, suddenly, huge cars appeared, black and dark as night. My mum shouted out, "Quick, get out of here!" So my dad hit the gas pedal really hard, and off they go, really fast, and the car bangs through the fence. Slap! They are leaving the rain, knock them off. "Quick!" "Yes, sir." Suddenly, they see loads of the cars blocking the way ahead. So my mum shouted out, "Oh no!" Dad said, "God, I'll have to turn to the right." Mum said, "But the forest." Dad said, "Precisely." Mum said, "You can't drive in the woods." Dad said, "Watch me." So my dad rushed to the right side of the road, whoosh, into the woods. "Sir, they've gone into the forest." "What? Who are these maniacs?" "Ah, watch out!" They darted across the forest between the trees, bumping around like mad, and Mum and Dad shouted out, "Yes, here we go." Then, suddenly, my mum shouted out, "Watch out, a river." Dad said, "I can see that. Here goes." "Come on, hot one." Whoosh, into the water. My dad pushed, and the car darted through the river. Fantastic. Where are they? We can't lose them. Then, not long after, they noticed the road that had appeared. They got to the end of the woods, and off they go. "We've lost them." "Okay then, you know who to contact now." "Yes, sir." Then my mum and dad went back to the city. My mum said, "Really great, but I don't think it's over." Dad said, "Of course not. We are taking the car to a good hiding spot and we are going to figure it out." Mum said, "Yeah, okay." So my dad took the car to this place and there were houses with no one in. And there they were, thinking. Dad said, "Perhaps, I thought, they're going to come back and find us. So what we have to do is repair." Mum said, "How? All we've got is a cool car, but that isn't going to win any battles now, is it?" Dad said, "Fair enough. That's true, but what choice do we have?" Mum said, "Do we have any resources at all?" "No, we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't." So, yeah. Dad said, "I'm not going to give up, and you shouldn't either." Mum said, "I just don't know what to do." Dad said, "Think of something else, will you? Aren't you? Why don't you go look inside the car? Perhaps there's forgotten stuff in there." "Okay, yeah." Mum said, "Okay." So she checked the car and said, "Harold, perhaps we do have some resources after all." So my dad looked at it. It was then Dad noticed they were two shotguns. They were both precisely like the one from the cafe. My dad began stepping back and away and said, Mum said, "What's the matter?" And then suddenly, my dad began to remember forgotten things. They came in flashbacks. There was an awful yelling and crying in my dad's head. It's all my fault. My mum said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And Dad said, "Nothing. Don't worry about it." Mum said, "Come on, sweetheart, you can tell me." Dad said, "I don't understand it either." Then, suddenly, they heard a terrible noise. There was the noise of police sirens. My mum picked up the guns, and Mum and Dad ran and jumped inside one of the houses with no one in. That's when they get into really big trouble. Dad said, "Oh no, this is horrible." There was the noise of a helicopter flying over. Then they heard a police officer, Georgie Bo. "This is the police. Again, we've had surrounded the area. Come outside and put your hands out into the air where I can see her." Dad said, I don't believe it. I really don't. That was really fast." My mum said, "I can't believe it. Why is this all happening to us?" Dad said, "Yeah, do not resist. I repeat, do not resist. Yes, that is a warning. So now, for the last time, come outside and put your hands out into the air where I can see them. Dad said, look, we've got no options left. We've got to listen before we get shot down. Perhaps you were right, Colleen. And my mum didn't say anything. Then they decided to start stepping towards the door. They were looking at each other, all shaky and shuddery. They went outside, and there they were. Loads of police cars and officers. And there's my mum and dad both going. Georgie Bo said, very well, yes, you two shouldn't ever get released again. Take them away. Dad said, I have to say, I can't stand you. And then he spat into Georgie Bo's face. Georgie Bo said, would you believe it, the little rat? It was then Georgie Bo began stepping towards my dad. Suddenly, a huge brown tank appeared on its own, pushing down trees. Georgie Bo shouted out, shit, get out of here! There was an awful yelling and crying. There was the noise of police officers running away like mad and cars leaving. Suddenly the tank began to aim right at Georgie Bo. So Mum and Dad ran and jumped behind one of the houses. Georgie Bo was standing there all shaky and shuddery, and he said, stop right there. And then suddenly someone appeared on the tank out of the little door. And it was the fat woman in dark and looking clothes from the cafe. She said, ha, look at you, little big man. Georgie Bo said, what's the meaning of all this? The woman said, just my business. And then suddenly my mum began to remember some forgotten things as well, just like my dad. Then the fat woman yelled, get out of the way, Georgie Bo. And Georgie Bo shouted out, no, Marcia, I won't. Suddenly, Marcia blows up Georgie Bo with the tank. Blimey. And she said, sorry, what did you say? It was then a little door on the back of the tank slid open and soldiers came running to my mum and dad. They had helmets and it was like bright green eyes were staring at my mum and dad, and they started talking in a language which my mum and dad could not understand. Then they took my mum and dad inside the tank and off they go. Marcia said, right you two, quiet please. Dad said, I don't suppose I will. So who are you? And Marcia didn't say anything. Dad said, okay, I'm going to call you Queen Fat. Okay, yeah. And Marcia still didn't say anything. Dad said, look out the door. There's your next hamburger. And Mum was sitting there laughing, oh no. So then Marcia slapped my dad and said, I know you could be trying to be funny to make light of the situation, but that isn't going to do much. Do you understand? Then suddenly the door opened and the soldiers pushed my mum and dad outside, and Marcia said to the soldiers, it was then my mum and dad noticed the base. It was huge. It said THC. They were taken inside the base. And then into the elevator. There they all were, breathing very, very quietly. Dad said, where is the elevator? You sink. It was then they noticed the boy in the corner. He was watching my mum and dad. So my mum said, hey little one, who are you? And he said, my name is Tono. It was then Mum noticed the gold blade on his back. So Mum said, what's that for? And Tono said, I'm from Japan and got in train in there, and I'm going to be the bestest in the land. Dad said, what does your mother say about that? And Tono didn't say anything. Then Marcia said, leave Tono alone. It's time to go, do you understand? And then they went to the hallway. Suddenly it appeared, a purple light. There was a man inside the vines, and he said, ha, I have you now. pointing at Marcia, and he slowly appeared from out of the shadows. There was a mask covering his face. His clothes were grey, black and purple. And then suddenly, my mum and dad remembered another forgotten thing. They noticed it was the man who was standing on the balcony in the cafe. And he said, I was supposed to take you down at Dolce's Grand Cafe, but someone had to get in the way. Though I have to say, our new mutual targets are far more interesting than you, Marcia. And he looked at my mum and dad, and he took this magic stick, and he said, no need to die. Give me Harold and Connie Rosen, and I shall catch you alive. Marcia said, look at that. It's Maniacal Plums, and I don't think we can make a deal. Sorry. Suddenly, it appeared. An orange light and a man creature appeared. He looked like a vampire with wings, and it was Haribo, the swore us, or Haribo's granddad. All his clothes were black with orange stuff on his face, and he said, I think it's really bad news when Plums and shows up when any other person is here. But, okay, so here goes. He turns to my mum and dad, and he goes, watch out everybody, it's going to get really loud. Then he opened his mouth, and then suddenly Maniacal Plums and shot Marcia with a magic spell. She said, no! Deep down, I regret all I've done. And she just fell over and died. And she disappeared in a flash. The creature said, you have only killed the fly in the grand sea of things. It was then Plums and took this brown ring Marcia had and said, I've got one of your precious Haribo rings. Your turn, Haribo. And then he pressed this ring with a magic spell, and the base began to shake. Meanwhile, Haribo, the swore began to scream really loud with screaming magic. Oh no! Plums and ran and pushed Mum and Dad into the elevator, and he said, repair. Then, in a flash, all three of them disappeared. There they were. My mum and dad and Maniacal Plums, and standing on a green hill far away, watching the base blow up into hundreds of pieces, hundreds and hundreds of them. Blimey. It was then Maniacal Plums and said, right, okay then, we've got loads to talk about, so let's start. Dad said, what just happened? I don't believe it, I really don't. Plums and said, I understand. I'm going to tell you about it all, but first of all, I know from my command, Tonar, that you don't remember what happened in the cafe. My mum said that's true, but I'm starting to remember some things, but I really can't believe it. Dad said, yeah, me too. Do you know, that's what happened when I was going mad back at that place, if you remember. So Mum said, yeah. Plums and said, I see. Dad said, are you the boss of the guys who took us away from prison? Plums and said, yeah, that's right. So, first of all, Harold and Connie Rosen, whose side are you on? Dad said, what does your side stand for? And he said, to save the world from the coming doom, and for that we've got to take down the Haribo Company. And then suddenly, Mum and Dad remembered THC. Dad said, why are me and my wife so special? Plums and said, it's because you two have got a special power. I don't know how yet, but you do, and I shall show you how to control it and use your powers for good things. Do you understand? My mum and dad said yes, and Dad said, fair enough. We choose your side. Good, he said. Now watch your step. We are going to see my good friend under the hill. And then suddenly a little door slid open, and down they go through the little door. And there they were, and it was filled with light blue, red and white, with a huge fountain right in the middle of the room with water streaming all round. Then it appeared on its own, a creature, and it was a kind of big magic word with a clothes and a hat. Plums and said, hey my little friend, meet Harold and Connie Rosen. And he said, hello, my name is Carlos, okay, wizard, and you can always find me here. And they told my mum and dad all about it, and that they had to be trained by Plums and himself in all kinds of ways. And they got new weapons, and they learned to accept what happened in the cafe. Then, after a month or two, it was time for the first mission. Carlos, okay, wizard, said to my mum and dad, right you two, We will deliver a blow to the Haribo company that will take them years to recover from just giving us enough time to repair. So you need to use your hours to find 3 of the Haribo rings in 3 places: London, Jamaica, and Scotland. Do you understand? And he gave my mum and dad a great big map and this gadget and this gold ring. And he said, use this gold ring to get inside the portals. When you're ready, when you've got all the rings, use the gadget to summon us. Good luck. And off they go. First of all to London, and they looked to see what they had to do. It said, the ring of London is in the big bin. My mum and dad poured into the big bin and looked round. They see the stair. Mum said, right, this is a long stair. Dad said, yeah, no, that's right. We've got to get to the boing, boing thing, you know. So it's rush, rush upstairs, and there it was, the great big bell. It was huge. Dad's hand darted across it, and there it went, boing, boing. Suddenly, it appeared, a little door inside the bell. There was a little man who came out, and he said, who is this? Dad said, Queen Elizabeth. The bell guy said, would you believe it? Is that you, Liz? Mum said, oh yeah, that's Queen Elizabeth, all right. The bell guy said, oh, it's really great to see you again, though I have to say my eyes are not what they used to be. Anyway, what are you doing here? Dad said, looking for the portal. So the bell guy said, you're right close up to it. So Dad took the gold ring out of his pocket. Then it appeared on its own, right in the middle of the bell. Dad said, thank you, bell guy. And he said, of course, Liz. So my mum and dad went inside the portal. And there they were. Mum said, I can't believe that worked. Anyway, Mum and Dad looked round. Everything was black except for the white lights. It was then Mum and Dad noticed the bells floating around everywhere. Then, suddenly, it appeared on its own, right in the middle of the stone floor, a terrifying bell creature called the Bell Guardian. Huge. It said, it began to come closer and closer towards Mum and Dad with a blade. It was huge. Dad screamed, quick! And they ran and jumped away. My mum said, I'm going to use the power. Dad said, me too. Here goes. Suddenly, my dad's eyes turned red. There's my mum, she's doing the same. Suddenly, the Bell Guardian stops. And he settles down with his blade and kneels before my mum and dad. And he said, my mum and dad were confused. Suddenly, my dad starts up talking in his spooky voice. Give me the ring. Then the creature took this ring off his finger and gave it to my mum and dad. My mum said, yeah, great. Suddenly, the creature goes and stands up. He just stands up and said, suddenly the creature starts swinging the blade to and fro, and Mum and Dad ran and jumped away like mad round the edge of the stone floor. Then the blade slaps through the wall above Mum and Dad. Mum screamed, quick, get out of here! We can't fight this thing. And they ran closer and closer to the portal. So it's rush, rush upstairs, and there it was. Then and another one of those bell creatures came in, but this one was a little one. So Mum and Dad pulled the guns out and began shooting away like mad. And the creature fell down. So my Mum and Dad escaped into the portal, and everything was lovely once again. It was then they went to Scotland. When they got there, Dad said, "Why don't we go to see some family? Perhaps they can help us a bit." Mum said yes, so they went to a house in the Green Hill Woods. The front door opened, and it was Uncle Botside and the flying Scotsmen. "Hello!" Uncle Botside calls out, "Come in, Harold and Connie, it's tea time. Do you want some?" "Yes," said my mum and dad cheerily. So, not long after, they had loads of tea. And there they were, sitting at the table. And my dad told them about the mission, and he showed them the ring, and he put it very carefully on the table. And then suddenly, Uncle Pickle and Uncle Cucumber turned up, and Uncle Cucumber said, "Mind you, me and Pickle found a ring just like that when we were hunting the vampires with Michael and Brian. Do you want it?" So Dad said, "Of course." Ha! And he gave it to my mum and dad, and they drank some more tea. After that, the flying Scotsmen decided they would come with my mum and dad, and there they were. London Airport, the aeroplane took off and flew into the air. When they got there, Uncle Jam Roly Poly and Uncle Vanilla found out that there was this reggae concert. Nice. Not long after, they all turned up to see the WORLD. Look at that. Dad said, "Yeah, I like it," and he's going. Suddenly, Uncle Pickle and Uncle Cucumber noticed something running outside. It was huge. So they told my mum and dad. Then my dad jumps on stage and he goes, "Watch out, everybody." It was then there was a man who turned up and said, "Is that you, Harold?" My dad frowned and then started looking to see who it was. Suddenly the man came running onto the stage, and it was the coolest teacher of my old school, Mr. Coolio. And he said, "What's up, my bro? Is Michael doing all right?" And he fist bumped my dad. Dad said, "Hey, Mr. Coolio, cool to see you here." It was then Mr. Coolio said there was a gorilla come in, but it saw me and ran far away. So great. "Anyway, what are you doing here?" Dad said, "I'm in the middle of a mission." And he showed Mr. Coolio the ring. Mr. Coolio said, "A week or two ago, I bought a ring just like that for 2 bananas and 15 gorilla hairs." Dad said, "Okay, but do you have it?" And he said, "I had it, but a terrifying gorilla took it from me, so let's go hunting." "Yes," says my dad cheerily, with a shotgun in his hand. Mr. Coolio said, "Coolio." A few days later, there they were, my mum and dad and Mr. Coolio with the flying Scotsmen in the Jamaican jungle. And there it was, the gorilla. It was huge. Mr. Coolio said, "Right guys, it's time to rumble." And he took this gold blade and said to my mum and dad, "Right you two, stay with me. These other doers know what to do. I shall give the sign when it's time. Do you understand?" My mum and dad said, "Got it." And there they were, watching the flying Scotsmen surrounding the great big gorilla. It was then Uncle Botside shouted out, "Shoot him up, boys!" And all the flying Scotsmen began to shoot magic. Pew! Whoosh! The gorilla was stuck. Mr. Coolio yelled, "Yes, here we go!" And he jumped down the bushes with my mum and dad. So what happened? My mum and dad shot the gorilla like mad, and it went like... Mr. Coolio ran and jumped on the creature and began to cut into the skull. Dig in. There was an awful yelling and crying, and then he peeled off the gorilla's face and said, "Take that, Mr. It." And he took this brown ring and gave it to my mum and dad. Wonderful. Suddenly, Mr. It turns to us, starts laughing, and he goes, "Fuck you, we red." And then he ran and disappeared in a bright green flash. "Oh no," Mr. Coolio said, "Don't worry about it. I'll finish it one day." Not long after, they left the jungle giraffes and said goodbye, and he gave the bag of good stuff and gorilla hairs to my mum and dad, and then they went home. there they were, in an abandoned place. My dad took the gadget out of his pocket and said to my mum, "Abandoned fly in Scotsmen." Okay, it's time. He pressed the button, then in a flash, CaptainPlums appeared. And he said, "You've got the rings, I can tell." Good! It was then my dad gave the rings, and then he asked, "What now?" Then CaptainPlums said, "For now, stay low. When the time comes, you will know. But it's time to blow up the Haribo base." Then CaptainPlums pressed the rings against each other. Then suddenly, a terrible noise from far away. CaptainPlums was delighted, and the rings squashed together into one special ring called the Plums Ring. Then CaptainPlums took this red ring out of his pocket and he gave it to my dad, and he blew one to my mum, and he said, "These shall be useful to you one day. A war will come in. We will meet again." And then he disappeared in a flash. Not long after, a few days later, my mum and dad went to this cafe. Mum said, "What do you want then?" And then he looked to see what there was and said, "I'll have a whiskey." "Just kidding, I'll have a strawberry pizza." Mum said, "You are maniacal." And then my dad said, "That is why we make such a nice team." Kaboom, 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 kaboom. CaptainPlums. When I get my soul